Hi everyone, this is Religiolog, and let's talk about the flood story. And not those we find in the ancient Mesopotamian mythology, like the one about Gilgamesh or the one about Atrahasis. No, in this video I'd like to focus strictly on the flood story from the book of Genesis in the Bible. An average person from Judeo-Christian culture understands it quite simple, but biblical experts find there are two distinct stories that someone put together. This is how Richard Friedman in his work Who Wrote the Bible divides them. And if we read Genesis from 6:5 to 8:22 altogether, we'll find too many contradictions and inconsistencies. As Joel Baden states, it is basically unreadable. By the way, if you'd like to know more on the subject of Hebrew Bible, I highly recommend watching the course by Professor Baden offered in fall of 2021 at Yale. The link will be in the description. So, what contradictions do I mean? First of all, it's something that biblical scholars call doublets, when the same story is told twice. On the screen you may see some examples. For instance, in one place Moses' father-in-law is called Reuel, while in the other his name is Jethro. Or a minimum age of service for Levites is 25 years old in one place, but in the other they have to be 30 years old. In our case, however, we're interested in the flood story. So it will be mentioning twice the birth of Noah, or 2 times God tells Noah about the flood, or 2 times Noah and his family enter the ark, and so on. But what is more interesting is that it's not simply a repetition, they contradict each other. One of the most obvious examples is that in one story the flood lasts 40 days, but in the other it lasts 150 days. There are 2 passages that speaks of how many of each animal entered the ark. According to one, 2 of every sort. According to the other, a pair of unclean animals, but birds and clean animals, 7 pairs each, so that Noah could later sacrifice them. In one story God is called Yahweh, in another Elohim. In one God behaves like a human, he personally closes the door of the ark after Noah and personally comes to smell the sacrifice. In another story, God is transcendent or cosmic. The first story has a covenant between God and humanity, the second does not. In the first, waters of the flood come from below, from the deep, or from above, the floodgates of the sky. In the second, it's just a rain. In one story we have a raven, while in the other it's a dove. One has a rainbow, the other doesn't. One has laws about how people are supposed to eat and what they can eat and who they can kill, but the other has sacrifices that are not mentioned in the first story. To explain this particular difference, many scholars believe it's because it was written by a descendant of Aaron, who believed that no one before Aaron, neither Adam, nor Noah, nor Abraham, no one had the right to offer a sacrifice to God. According to the documentary hypothesis, this narrative is a product of priestly source that was more likely put together during the Persian period somewhere in the 6th century BCE. So, if we divide these stories, we'll see that they both are perfectly complete and coherent. They have beginnings and endings, they are internally consistent and coherent in plot, theme, and language, and the problem appears only if we try to combine them into one. What is also interesting is that when we divide both stories, we also find stylistic differences. Each story has some unique features. This is what Richard Friedman says. The very fact that it is possible to separate out 2 continuous stories like this is remarkable itself, and it is strong evidence for the documentary hypothesis. One need only try to do the same thing with any other book to see how impressive this phenomenon is. But it is not only that it is possible to carve out 2 stories. What makes the case so powerful is that each story consistently uses its own language. The P story consistently refers to the deity as God. The J story always uses the name Yahweh. P refers to the sex of the animals with the words male and female. J uses the term man and his woman. P says that everything expired. G says that everything died. Joel Baden points to other stylistic differences. Here is a slide from one of his lectures during the course on the Hebrew Bible that he offered at Yale. Once again, the link is in the description. I understand why you might be confused about those J or P sources if you are not familiar with the documentary hypothesis. I'll explain it in more details in one of my future episodes on this channel, so make sure you click that notification button. But for now, in short, it has to do with an idea that the Pentateuch or Torah, or the first 5 books of the Bible, is based on 4 original independent sources, which gradually developed in different traditions. They are the Yahwehist, Elohist, Deuteronomist, and priestly sources. This is what Joel Baden states. When the Pentateuch is read with a careful eye toward the narrative inconsistencies, the individual fragments coalesce in 4 strands or sources, each of which is internally consistent and markedly distinct in its historical claims. Furthermore, each of these sources is recognizable as an independently composed text, a document that once stood on its own, only later to be incorporated with the others. This claim, 4 original independent documents that have been subsequently combined and interwoven, is the central assertion of the documentary hypothesis. Today this theory exists in different variations, but once again, this video is not about the hypothesis, so I'll skip the details, just mentioning that today some scholars also lean towards so-called supplementary hypothesis, which also talks about different sources, but a bit differently. So let's get back to the flood stories. Another interesting observation that scholars find is that both flood stories perfectly match 2 different accounts of the creation stories. Yes, if it comes as a surprise to you, there are 2 distinct creation stories in Genesis. One derives from Genesis 1 and continues in Genesis 5. The other is occupying chapters 2, 3, and 4. Here we find similar patterns. One source calls God Elohim, the other Yahweh. In one, God is more transcendent or cosmic and creates just by the power of His word. In the other, he is more anthropomorphic and behaves just as humans do. He personally plants trees in the Garden of Eden and molds from the mud not only humans but also animals or women from Adam's rib. People watch him walk in the garden and can communicate with him. This God himself made garments for Adam and Eve and clothed them, and so on. In the other story, the author describes a God that doesn't appear to people face to face, but appears in dreams, through revelations, or speaks through the prophets. In one story, God creates animals first, and only then humans. By the way, not only man, but humans as a species in one day. In the other story, to what scholars refer as Yahwehist, God first creates Adam, only then he decides to create animals precisely for the sake of this one man, and only then he decides to create a woman. Anyway, I hope you feel the difference. There are many other dissimilarities, some of them you may see on the screen, but please, I don't want to go into too many details. It's a different topic for a separate video. But what I'm trying to say is that it seems as those 2 flood stories perfectly match these 2 creation stories, and when we look at them separately, they appear consistent and logical. They have a similar literary style, relying on similar concepts and vocabulary, and this is another incredible argument in favor of the documentary hypothesis. While Richard Friedman explains that despite strong opposition in the past, at present, however, there is hardly a biblical scholar in the world who would claim that the 5 books of Moses were written by Moses or by any one person. Scholars argue about the number of different authors who wrote any given biblical book. They argue about when the various documents were written and about whether a particular verse belongs to this or that document, but the documentary hypothesis itself continues to be the starting point of research. No serious student of the Bible can fail to study it, and no other explanation of the evidence has come close to challenging it. At the same time, I must also note that there are some scholars that are not convinced by the argumentation of the hypothesis, and keep denying that the flood story in Genesis is indeed a combination of 2 distinct stories. If you are interested, you may check some of these authors and see how they try to justify various doublets in the flood or in the creation story. At the end of the day, it's up to you what theory you want to trust. You may read those passages directly from the Bible or what scholars suggest, and to decide what makes more sense to you. But in this video, I presented you with those who are in favor of documentary hypothesis in one form or the other, and I believe it represents the majority view in modern scholarship of Pentateuch. My friends, I hope you enjoyed the video and found it interesting. If so, please give it a like, leave a comment below, and check out my other videos. If you like what I do, please consider supporting me on Patreon or with one-time donation. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching till the end. I wish you peace and health wherever you are.